Your brain is not trying to make you happy. That sounds like a bleak way to start, but it's actually the key to understanding one of the most useful things psychology and evolutionary biology have figured out in the last 50 years. The brain's job, the thing it was shaped by millions of years of natural selection to do, is to keep you alive long enough to reproduce. Happiness is occasionally useful for that goal. Mostly, though, what's useful is something more complicated, a suite of fast, automatic responses to specific situations that bias you toward survival-relevant behavior before your conscious mind has had time to think about it. Those responses are emotions. Every emotion you have ever felt, including the ones that have made your life harder, the ones you've spent years trying not to feel, the ones that have seemed completely irrational in the moment, has a functional logic, understanding that logic doesn't make the emotions go away, but it changes the relationship you can have with them. They stop being random weather and start being legible. We're going to go through them one by one. Fear. Fear is the oldest one, which is why it feels the most physical. When something triggers fear, a loud noise, a face that looks threatening, a situation that resembles a past danger, the amygdala fires before the cortex has processed what's happening. The stress response cascade launches, adrenaline enters the bloodstream, heart rate climbs, blood moves from the digestive system toward the large muscles, pupils dilate, attention narrows to the threat. All of this happens in milliseconds, well before you're consciously afraid. The evolutionary logic is obvious but worth stating precisely. In an ancestral environment where real physical threats were common, the cost of a false positive, being afraid of something that turned out to be harmless, was low. You waste a little energy. The cost of a false negative, failing to register a real threat, could be your life. So the system is calibrated to err heavily toward triggering. Better to startle at a stick that looks like a snake than to ignore a snake because it might be a stick. This calibration is why fear in modern life so often feels disproportionate. The system wasn't designed for a world where the things that trigger it, a tense email, a social slight, financial stress, are rarely followed by physical danger. The response is the same. The outlet isn't. What fear is doing at bottom is buying you time and physical resources. It is your body making a unilateral decision that the next few seconds require every available resource and acting on that decision before you've had a chance to second guess it. Anger gets a worse reputation than it deserves, partly because its most visible expressions are destructive, and partly because in most social contexts we're taught to suppress it from childhood. Its evolutionary function is to signal and mobilize. Anger communicates clearly and automatically that a boundary has been violated, that something you need or value is being threatened or taken. The behavioral program it activates is approach rather than avoidance. It moves you toward the problem rather than away from it, which is why it feels so different from fear, despite both being responses to threat in a social species. This matters enormously. An individual who could not get angry, who had no automatic response to being cheated, dominated, or having resources taken, would be consistently exploited. Anger is what makes exploitation costly for the person doing it. It's the enforcement mechanism for social norms and personal boundaries. There's evidence that people who suppress anger chronically don't eliminate it. They internalize it, and it tends to surface as passive aggression, rumination, or physical symptoms. The emotion isn't going anywhere because the signal it's carrying hasn't been addressed. Something was violated. The anger is pointing at it. The problem with anger isn't that it exists. The problem is that the behavioral program it activates, confrontation, resource competition, is adapted for a social environment very different from the ones most of us navigate. The calibration is off, but the pointing is usually accurate. Disgust. Disgust is probably the most underrated emotion in terms of how much work it's doing. Its original function was pathogen avoidance. Long before humans understood germ theory, the disgust response was performing exactly that function, instinctively causing aversion to spoiled food, bodily waste, infected individuals, and anything with the sensory profile of contamination. The facial expression of disgust, the wrinkled nose, the narrowed eyes, the lip curl, physically closes off the airways and reduces intake. The body is trying to prevent something harmful from getting in. What makes disgust remarkable is how far beyond its original domain it has expanded. The same response that evolved to keep you from eating rotten meat now governs moral intuitions, social norms, and political attitudes. Research by Jonathan Haidt and others has shown that people primed to feel disgust by sitting near a trash can or by hypnotic suggestion give harsher moral judgments on completely unrelated scenarios. The emotional state bleeds directly into reasoning. This has significant implications. A lot of what people experience as moral conviction, the sense that something is just obviously wrong, that the wrongness is self-evident, may be disgust responses that have been attached to moral categories that's not necessarily invalid. Disgust has good calibration within its original domain, but it's worth knowing that the feeling of certainty it produces can attach to targets that have nothing to do with contamination or harm. Sadness. Sadness slows you down, that's the point. The behavioral profile of sadness, reduced energy, social withdrawal, decreased interest in future-oriented activity, increased rumination, looks like a system that's gone into low-power mode to do processing work. The dominant current theory is that sadness functions as a signal of loss and a prompt for recalibration. Something that mattered is gone. A person, a relationship, a version of the future, and the mind needs time to update its model of the world accordingly. The slowing is functional. High-energy goal pursuit doesn't help when what's needed is integration. Withdrawal reduces the social demands that would otherwise require performance when internal resources are depleted. Rumination, irritating as it is, appears to increase analytical processing of the loss, working through what happened, what it means, what needs to change. There's evidence from cross-cultural psychology that controlled sadness improves decision quality on certain tasks, particularly ones requiring careful evaluation of trade-offs. A sad person is less likely to rely on heuristics and more likely to slow down and examine evidence. The emotion is calibrating the processing speed to the complexity of the situation. Where sadness becomes pathological is when the recalibration gets stuck, when the rumination doesn't resolve, when the withdrawal becomes permanent, when the signal doesn't clear even after the processing work is done, but the machinery itself, running correctly, is doing something genuinely useful. Joy is the most straightforwardly rewarding emotion, which tends to make people think of it as the goal, the thing the other emotions are unfortunate detours from. That framing underestimates it. Joy's function, in evolutionary terms, is to mark and reinforce behaviors that promoted survival and reproduction. Food, sex, successful social bonding, achievement of goals. The reward response signals that whatever just happened was worth doing again. Without it, there's no mechanism for building behavioral tendencies toward beneficial outcomes. Barbara Fredrickson, a psychologist who has spent years studying positive emotions, specifically developed what she calls the broaden and build theory. Her argument is that while negative emotions narrow attention and behavioral repertoires to handle specific threats, positive emotions do the opposite. They broaden the scope of what the mind notices, considers, and is willing to try. Joy, specifically, tends to produce exploratory, open creative cognition. It's the state that's most associated with learning for its own sake, with building skills and relationships that don't have an immediate payoff. The build part of the theory is that these broadened repertoires accumulate over time into durable resources, skills, knowledge, relationships, psychological resilience, that then become available when things get harder. Joy is, in this reading, the emotion that makes investment in the future possible. It rewards the building of long-term assets during the windows when short-term threats aren't demanding full attention. Surprise, surprise is the shortest emotion on this list in terms of duration. It typically lasts less than a second before transitioning into something else. Fear, joy, curiosity, or confusion depending on what follows. Its function is orientation. When something happens that doesn't match the brain's predictions, surprise fires as an interrupt, clearing current processing and redirecting full attention to the unexpected stimulus. The raised eyebrows, widened eyes, and open mouth of the surprise expression maximize sensory intake right at the moment of the unexpected event. From a predictive processing perspective, which is how many neuroscientists currently think about the brain, surprise is the signal that a prediction error has occurred. The world didn't behave as modeled. Resources need to redirect to update the model. The brief state of suspension that surprise produces, where ongoing behavior pauses, is the system creating space for that update. This is why surprise is such a powerful tool in learning environments, comedy, storytelling, in any domain where attention and memory formation matter. A surprise event gets processed differently than an expected one. It tends to encode more strongly, to prompt active engagement with new information, and to update beliefs more readily than information that confirms existing expectations. Anxiety. Anxiety is what fear looks like when there's no specific present threat, just an anticipated one. Where fear is a response to something immediate, anxiety runs on simulation. The brain is modeling possible futures, finding ones that contain danger, and producing the fear response preemptively. This is genuinely useful. An organism that could only respond to threats once they materialized would be at a significant disadvantage to one that could anticipate and prepare. Anxiety is the mechanism that gets you to the doctor for a suspicious symptom before it becomes a crisis, that makes you check the weather before a long drive, that keeps you from leaving your bag unattended in a crowded space. The cost is that simulation is computationally expensive and not always accurate. The brain running threat simulations can wander far from realistic scenarios. Chronic anxiety often involves simulating low probability catastrophes with the same urgency as near certain dangers. And unlike fear, which typically clears once the threat passes, anxiety has no clear-off switch. The future never arrives, so there's always more to simulate. What anxiety is telling you at its most functional is that something in your anticipated future requires attention or preparation. That message is often worth hearing even when the volume at which it's delivered is far higher than necessary. Shame and guilt, these two tend to get used interchangeably in ordinary language, but they're functionally distinct in ways that matter considerably. Guilt is object-focused. The feeling attaches to a specific behavior. I did something wrong. The motivational program it activates is repair, apology, restitution, changing the behavior that caused harm. Guilt is socially integrative. It acknowledges damage to a relationship and creates pressure to fix it. Research on guilt consistently finds that it's associated with pro-social outcomes and better relationship maintenance. Shame is self-focused. The feeling attaches to identity. I am something wrong. The motivational program it activates is concealment and withdrawal, to hide, to disappear, to escape. Evaluation, shame is socially disintegrative. It doesn't prompt repair because the self, unlike a behavior, can't simply be corrected. Both emotions have evolutionary logic. The capacity to feel bad about norm violations is what makes social cooperation possible. A person with no capacity for either guilt or shame would be a consistent free rider, taking from cooperative systems without contributing or facing internal cost for doing so. The emotions make the internal cost real. The asymmetry in outcomes comes from where the feeling lands. Guilt says you did something that violated the group's norms, now fix it. Shame says you're someone who violates norms and the solution is to not be seen. One of these is much more useful than the other for actually navigating social life. Jealousy has a specific structure that distinguishes it from envy, though the two are often confused. Jealousy involves three parties, you, someone you're bonded to, and a third party who threatens that bond. Envy involves two, you and someone who has something you want. The emotions feel similar, but they're tracking different things. Jealousy's evolutionary function is mate retention and resource protection in pair-bonded relationships. For social species where parental investment is high and pair bonds are important, the threat of a third party co-opting a bonded partner represents a genuinely significant fitness cost. Jealousy is the alarm system for that threat. The interesting thing about jealousy research is the gender asymmetry it has repeatedly found. Men, on average, show stronger physiological jealousy responses to sexual infidelity scenarios. Women, on average, show stronger responses to emotional infidelity scenarios. Evolutionary psychologists argue this maps onto asymmetric reproductive concerns, paternity uncertainty for men, resource and commitment withdrawal for women. The finding is real across many cultures, though its interpretation is contested. What jealousy is doing functionally is monitoring the security of a valued bond and activating behavior aimed at preserving it. The problem is that the same system activates readily in modern contexts that don't actually threaten anything, and the behavioral programs it triggers, surveillance, confrontation, control, are poorly adapted to those contexts. Awe is one of the more recently studied emotions, and what researchers have found is more interesting than the popular conception of it as simply feeling small. Dacher, Keltner, and Jonathan Haidt, who have studied awe extensively, characterize it as arising when something exceeds your current mental frameworks, when an experience is too vast, too complex, or too profound to assimilate into existing understanding. The Grand Canyon, a piece of music that hits exactly right, a night sky far from city lights, a mathematical proof, the scale of geologic time. The feeling of being momentarily unable to contain what you're perceiving. The functional effect of awe is a reliably documented reduction in the perceived importance of the self. People in awe states show decreased activation of the default mode network, the brain network associated with self-referential thinking. They report feeling smaller, but not in a distressing way. More connected, more aware of being part of something larger. The behavioral and cognitive effects are measurable. Awe increases prosocial behavior, reduces entitlement, improves critical thinking on certain tasks, and produces time perception shifts, the feeling that time has expanded. People in awe states tend to feel like they have more of it. The evolutionary origin of awe is less clear than the more ancient emotions, which makes sense. It may be a byproduct of the cognitive systems that produce social hierarchy, responses, and framework updating rather than a specifically selected for emotion. But its effects on cooperation, humility, and the motivation to understand the world suggest it punches well above its weight in terms of social utility. Nostalgia has a strange history as an emotion. It was classified as a medical disease in the 17th century. Swiss physician Johannes Hofer coined the term from the Greek for homecoming and pain, and it appeared in medical texts as a condition, affecting soldiers far from home, sometimes fatally. It took until the late 20th century for psychology to start treating it as a normal, functional emotion rather than a pathology. Konstantin Siddiqides has spent years studying nostalgia empirically. His findings are consistently counterintuitive. Nostalgia is triggered reliably by negative states, loneliness, cold temperatures, perceived meaninglessness, and its function appears to be psychological resource mobilization. When you're nostalgic, you're accessing memories of times when you felt connected, valued, competent, and like life had meaning. The emotional warmth of those memories produces measurable increases in social connectedness, self-continuity, and sense of meaning in the present. In short, nostalgia is a coping mechanism that the mind reaches for when current conditions are depleted, and it works by borrowing resources from the past. The bittersweet quality, the mixture of warmth and longing, appears to be functional rather than incidental. The longing component creates motivation to seek in the present what the memory contained. The warmth component provides enough of a resource boost to actually pursue it. It's a past-oriented emotion with a present-oriented effect. Boredom was taken seriously as a research subject fairly recently, which is somewhat ironic given how universal it is. The current leading account treats boredom as a signal of misalignment between current engagement and the mind's need for meaningful activity. It arises not simply from a lack of stimulation, but from a specific combination: low engagement, low challenge, and the awareness that time and attention could be better spent. Sandy Mann and John Eastwood, who study boredom professionally, have found that boredom is associated with increased creative output and divergent thinking, when people are allowed to sit with it, rather than immediately escape it. The restless searching quality of boredom The feeling that there must be something better appears to drive exploratory behavior and the generation of novel solutions to the problem of how to spend one's time. Its evolutionary function is thought to be motivational. An organism that was content to stay still in any situation would be outcompeted by one that grew restless when the current environment offered diminishing returns and began seeking more productive territory. Boredom is the push signal for that seeking behavior. The modern relationship with boredom is complicated by the fact that escaping it has never been easier or cheaper. Smartphones have made it possible to immediately satisfy the signal with low effort, low reward stimulation. Bypassing the exploratory behavior the signal was designed to trigger. Whether this has effects on creativity, motivation, or tolerance for difficulty is an active area of research. All of these emotions share a structural feature worth naming. They're information systems, not verdict systems. Fear says something in the environment looks dangerous. Anger says something you value has been violated. Sadness says something has been lost and needs processing. Joy says something worth reinforcing just happened. Disgust says something may be contaminating. Anxiety says something in the anticipated future needs attention. Guilt says a behavior violated your values. Shame says you fear you are the violation. Jealousy says a valued bond is under threat. Awe says your framework just got too small. Nostalgia says current conditions are depleted and resources from the past are available. Boredom says the current situation is a poor use of your attention. None of those are commands. They're messages sent from one part of the system to another, designed for an environment that doesn't perfectly match the one most of us live in. The signal is usually pointing at something real. The behavioral program it wants to run is often outdated. The gap between those two things, the accuracy of the signal and the mismatch of the response, is most of what therapy, philosophy, and emotional intelligence are actually trying to address. Not the elimination of emotions, the development of enough literacy to hear what they're saying and decide deliberately what to do with it. Your brain isn't trying to make you happy. It's trying to keep you informed. What you do with the information